I guess I do really wake up magical and fly like this.
这条路却难走，我看遍这人间坎坷辛苦，我还有多少爱，我还有多少泪，要苍天知道，我不认输。感恩的心，感谢有你伴我一生，让我有勇气做我自己。感恩的心，感谢命运，花开花落，我一样会珍惜。我来自偶然，像一颗尘土，有谁看出我的脆弱？我来自何方？我情归何处？谁在下一刻呼唤我？天地虽宽，这条路
Yeah, that
却
does.
难走。我看遍这
That sounds like a French false friend there. Je sais quoi? I don't think that's French they're speaking there.
多少爱，我还有多少泪，要苍天知道，我不认输。感恩的心，感谢有你伴我一生，让我有勇气做我自己。感恩的心，感谢命运，花开花落，我一样会珍惜。感恩的心，感谢有你伴我一生，让我有勇气做我自己。感恩的心，感谢命运，花开花落，我一样会珍惜。
Reggae fever.
It's that time again. CIUT's fall fundraiser is officially underway, and the on-air campaign is ready to launch November 18th to 24th. We would love for you to support the sound of your city by donating today. Visit CIUT.fm online to make your tax-deductible donation and show that you value independent programming presented here each and every day. That's www.ciut.fm. We look forward to hearing from you.
From the roots
those of the producers and or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of CIUT FM.
From New York, this is Democracy Now! The reason why
It's October 25th, 2024. Democracy Now! From yesterday's broadcast.
It's an inhumane policy. It's a failed policy that is helping neither Palestinians, neither Israelis. As Israel's devastating siege on northern Gaza intensifies, we'll speak with Halarat, the first and only U.S. career diplomat to resign from the State Department over U.S. policy on Israel. We'll talk about Gaza, Israel's bombing of Lebanon, and U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken's visit to the region. He's now in Saudi Arabia after leaving Israel. Then to Puerto Rico, where a pro-independence party is hoping to make history in next month's election. We'll speak to Ana Irma Rivera Lacen, who's running to be Puerto Rico's sole member of Congress, albeit a non-voting member.
Our position is to give the people of Puerto Rico a different option that moves us beyond the disaster. It's more important than the selfishness of thinking only about the parties. We united from that point of view to give Puerto Rico an alternative that provides answers to the people of Puerto Rico in the face of this scary corruption that exists.
And as New York Mayor Eric Adams resists calls to resign after being indicted on federal corruption charges, we'll speak to New York State lawmaker Zoran Mamdani. He's just announced he'll run for mayor next year as a Democratic Socialist. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's leading human rights group, B'Tselem, has accused the Israeli military of committing ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza as its devastating siege continues for a 19th day. In the Jabalia refugee camp, Israeli forces stormed at least 3 schools sheltering Palestinians, forcing those inside to leave at gunpoint before setting fire to the buildings. Palestinians fleeing the shattered remains of Beit Lahia report seeing bodies in the streets and Israeli soldiers detaining and beating men. The stench of death is everywhere. This comes as a United Nations report published Tuesday found 1 year of Israeli attacks on Gaza has set back the territory's economic development nearly 7 decades, plunging 3 of every 4 surviving Palestinians into poverty, with Israeli strikes on civilian infrastructure leaving behind a, quote, vast wasteland of rubble and twisted steel, unquote. The UN warns Palestinians under Israeli siege in northern Gaza, quote, are rapidly exhausting all available means for their survival, unquote. Israel's intensifying its attacks on Lebanon. Earlier today, Israel bombed the historic Lebanese port city of Tyre, one of the oldest cities in the world, after ordering residents to leave their homes and businesses. More Israeli airstrikes hit Beirut's southern suburbs overnight. Israel's army announced it had killed Hasham Safieddine, presumed to be the next head of Hezbollah after Israel assassinated its former leader Hassan Nasrallah in an airstrike in September. On Tuesday, Lebanese cabinet member Nasser Yassin said Lebanon will need $250 million a month to help over 1 million people who've been displaced by Israel's assault. He spoke ahead of an international summit on Lebanon taking place in Paris later this week.
Overnight, we've seen more than 1 million people being displaced by the attacks, hostilities, by the aggression. And this is similar to an earthquake. You don't see this number in its scale and the speed of it, except in major natural disasters. And this is what happened in 48 hours.
Meanwhile, the Financial Times reports Israel's military forcibly entered a clearly marked United Nations base and is suspected of using the incendiary chemical white phosphorus close enough to injure 15 peacekeepers. The use of white phosphorus as a weapon is a war crime under international law. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers fatally shot an 11-year-old Palestinian child during a raid Tuesday in the city of Nablus. Abdullah Hawash was critically injured and later died of his wounds. Over the past year, Israeli forces have killed at least 760 Palestinians in the West Bank, while more than 11,400 have been arrested in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's arrived in Saudi Arabia after wrapping up talks with senior Israeli officials in Tel Aviv. The State Department says Blinken urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to revive Gaza's ceasefire negotiations and pushed Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza. On Tuesday evening, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Tel Aviv hotel where Blinken was meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog. They were demanding the U.S. pressure Israel into making a ceasefire deal that would see the release of hostages held by Hamas. The protesters, most of them family members of hostages, held signs reading, "No more war, no more bloodshed, free our state, free our hostages." Blinken's 11th trip to the Middle East in just over a year comes as Axios reports the State Department is reviewing U.S. aid to Israeli units accused of killing, torturing, and sexually assaulting Palestinians. ProPublica reported in April that a State Department panel had recommended as long ago as last December that multiple Israeli military and police units should be disqualified from receiving U.S. aid under the Leahy Amendment, the 1997 law that requires the United States to cut off financial aid to those credibly accused of human rights violations. Secretary Blinken still has not taken any action. Al Jazeera is continuing to demand for the immediate medical evacuation of two of its journalists in Gaza injured in Israeli attacks. Al Jazeera camera operator Fadi Al-Wahidi was paralyzed after he was shot in the neck by an Israeli sniper while reporting in Jabalia earlier this month. Israeli authorities have blocked the evacuation of Al-Wahidi from Gaza, as well as that of fellow Al Jazeera camera person Ali Al-Attar, to receive urgently needed medical treatment. Al-Attar suffered serious injuries due to shrapnel from an Israeli airstrike in Deir al-Balah, causing a cerebral hemorrhage. In related news, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders is leading a group of U.S. lawmakers urging the Biden administration to open an investigation into the October 2023 Israeli attack that killed Reuters video journalist Issam Abdallah in southern Lebanon. 6 others were injured, including reporters for Agence France Presse and Al Jazeera. Leaders of the BRICS alliance, led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have gathered in the Russian city of Kazan. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is attending the summit. Its host, Russian President Vladimir Putin, said over 30 countries have expressed a desire to join BRICS this year. As the summit opened, U.S. Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin accused North Korea of deploying troops to Russia. He's the first U.S. official to make the claim after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused North Korea of assisting Russia's occupation of Ukraine. This follows a mutual defense pact signed by Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June. Former President Trump's longest-serving chief of staff has warned Trump meets the definition of a fascist. Retired Marine General John Kelly made the remarks in an on-the-record interview with the New York Times.
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks
said on several occasions, quote, Hitler did some good things too, unquote. Separately, The Atlantic magazine reports Trump said during a private meeting at the White House, quote, I need the kind of generals Hitler had, unquote. Trump also reportedly referred to 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen, whose 2020 murder at Fort Hood in Texas brought global attention to the epidemic of sexual violence in the U.S. military. Trump reportedly referred to her as a, quote, effing Mexican, though Trump used the expletive. Trump reportedly ordered his then chief of staff, Mark Meadows, not to pay for Guillen's funeral, something the military had promised to do. Kamala Harris's campaign has said it regrets a decision to eject a Muslim American Democrat from a Monday evening rally in Metro Detroit, where Harris was joined on stage by Republican former Wyoming Congressmember Liz Cheney. Amy Goodman, a Democratic Party activist, former House candidate for Michigan's 11th District, says he RSVP'd to the event, cleared security, was seated at the Royal Oak Musical Theater when a staffer ordered him to leave or be put into the back of a police car. Ghanem told the Detroit News he felt targeted because he's Muslim, adding, quote, I didn't even have anything like a Palestinian keffiyeh, any signs or a banner, nothing. None of that is allowed inside. I guess that's how the Democratic Party deals with Muslims, he said. This comes as a new poll from Arab News finds Arab Americans are slightly more likely to vote for Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. Georgia's Supreme Court has declined to reinstate election rules approved by a partisan pro-Trump majority on the Georgia State Election Board. Among other things, the new rules would have required ballots to be hand-counted, potentially delaying results and sowing chaos on election night. Here in New York, a federal judge has ordered former mayor, former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani, to turn over his luxury Manhattan apartment and other prized possessions to a pair of Georgia election workers whom Giuliani falsely accused of committing election fraud during ballot counting operations in 2020, leading to a torrent of death threats from Trump supporters against them. Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss were awarded $146 million last year after Giuliani was found liable for defaming them. Along with his apartment, Giuliani will have to hand over his collection of luxury watches, signed baseball memorabilia, and a 1980 Mercedes-Benz previously owned by actor Lauren Bacall. The judge has given him 7 days.
Yeah.
Here in New York, the trial for a white former U.S. Marine who choked black street performer Jordan Neely to death on a subway train in May of last year began this week in a Manhattan court. Daniel Penny's facing charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide for holding Neely in a chokehold until he died. Neely, a 30-year-old beloved street performer, was unhoused and hungry and crying out for help when the ex-Marine attacked him. Neely was well known to New Yorkers and tourists as a talented Michael Jackson impersonator. In Mozambique, more protests have erupted over allegations of fraud in the October 9th presidential and parliamentary elections. European Union poll observers on Tuesday noted irregularities during counting and unjustified alteration of election results at polling station and district level and urged transparency from Mozambique's election authorities. Protesters took to the streets of the capital Maputo, despite a violent crackdown by Mozambique security forces.
Our rights to protest as Mozambican citizens gave me the will to go to the streets. What is happening in the country are things which I do not understand. There are killings, kidnappings, and we end up not understanding who is behind it. And automatically, Mozambique is not safe anymore.
And the UN Biodiversity Conference, known as COP16, has opened in Cali, Colombia, as indigenous and environmental activists demand world leaders enact bolder actions to protect an estimated 1 million plant and animal species threatened by extinction, most of them due to human activity. The conference is taking place as experts warn humanity is on the precipice due to worsening biodiversity loss and the catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis. This is Colombia's Environment Minister, Susana Mohammed.
This should be an international priority. Resources for war, trillions of dollars are immediately handed out. In 1 week, billions of dollars were given for military weapons and bombs. But we take years to obtain fair financing at the scale we needed when we talk about the most important issue, to defend life. This is what creates inclusive safety for everyone and provides a chance of survival for younger generations.
Among the demands are the implementation of a $20 billion fund for global biodiversity protection that was approved in 2022, which wealthier nations have failed to contribute to as promised, as well as financial support for indigenous communities that are in the front lines of biodiversity protection. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I am Amy Goodman in New York with Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Israel's leading human rights group, B'Tselem, has accused Israel of committing ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza as Israel's devastating siege on the area continues. In a statement, the group said, quote, "The magnitude of the crimes Israel's currently committing in the northern Gaza Strip and its campaign to empty it of however many residents are left is impossible to describe, not just because hundreds of thousands of people enduring starvation, disease without access to medical care, and incessant bombardments and gunfire defies comprehension, but because Israel has cut them off from the world." These are the words of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. In the Jabalia refugee camp, Israeli forces stormed at least 3 schools, forcing Palestinians sheltering inside to leave at gunpoint before setting fire to the buildings. Palestinians in the refugee camp say they fear they'll be killed if they stay put or if they try to flee south.
A lot of rockets fell on us, and the quadcopters started shouting and telling us to get out of the area. We evacuated and found lots of tanks and Israeli soldiers, and we were taken to a very large area, and they started shooting at us. They then started evacuating us from the area 10 by 10. When we reached here, I didn't know where to come or go. I'm sitting in the street with my children.
This comes as the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, has issued a report stating it could take Gaza 350 years to rebuild if it remains under an Israeli blockade. Meanwhile, Israel is also intensifying its attack on Lebanon. Earlier today, Israel bombed the historic Lebanese town of Tyre, one of the oldest cities in the world. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken arrived in Saudi Arabia after leaving Israel, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials. Blinken spoke to reporters before leaving Israel.
Israel has achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed much of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. This has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really 2 things left to do. Get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow.
That was U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken. We're joined now by Hala Rarat. She served 18 years as a career diplomat before resigning in April from the State Department over the Biden administration's Gaza policy. She's the first and only State Department diplomat to publicly resign over Gaza. At the time she left, she was the Arabic language spokesperson for the State Department and the deputy director of the State Department's Dubai Regional Media Hub. Hala Rarat, thank you so much for being in our New York studio. We were just playing a clip of your former boss, of U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken. Your thoughts as we just passed this first anniversary of the Hamas attack on southern Israel and the ensuing Israeli attack on Gaza that has killed, this is by far considered an underestimate by most, at least 42,000 Palestinians, over 17,000 of them children.
First of all, Amy, thank you so much for having me. It really is an honor, and I have to tell you on behalf of so many diplomats, huge fan of yours. American diplomats have been watching your show for years, and we thank you for everything that you do. In response to the onslaught of Gaza, I want to state the failures of this policy. That even for those that are thinking of it as this side versus another, we have to be realistic about the fact that it has absolutely failed. Secretary Blinken said Israel has achieved the strategic objectives in Gaza. No, it hasn't. That is quite a lie. Its objectives was the release of the hostages. That has not been achieved. Its objective was also the destruction of Hamas. That has not been achieved. The reality is that we, as the United States government, are in violation of U.S. law, of a multiple of laws that your viewers can Google for themselves. The Leahy Law, the Foreign Assistance Act, the Arms Export Control Act. We continue to willfully violate laws so that we surge U.S. military assistance to Israel. To what end? We are only empowering Benjamin Netanyahu to expand the conflict in Gaza, to expand the conflict within the West Bank, and now we're seeing the devastation in Lebanon. Again, to what end? We saw the Lebanese foreign minister insist that Nasrallah and Hezbollah had actually agreed to the U.S. and France proposal for a ceasefire before he was assassinated. There are other ceasefires in Gaza that we have been pushing, that Netanyahu is the obstacle. Yet this administration refuses to shift its policy, refuses to enforce U.S. law, and continues to surge U.S. military assistance. And the result has been devastating. Absolutely devastating. These are human beings in Gaza that are being absolutely massacred, children, and this is going to have generational impacts and ultimately will not keep Israel any safer. And the entire region is destabilized, as we're seeing now with the threat of Iran as well. The policy has to change, and it has to change now.
And Hala, I wanted to ask you, it wasn't until earlier this month that Secretary of State Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sent Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a letter threatening to cut off U.S. military assistance if Israel does not boost humanitarian aid to Gaza in the next 30 days. What's your response?
Thank you, Juan, for highlighting that. I can tell you, as someone that worked within the State Department PR machine, that this, unfortunately, is a public relations ploy. I'm sad to say it, but it's the truth. It is conveniently 30 days, marking the time after the election. Also, it was conveniently leaked. It's not typical for a statement like this to be leaked to the press, but it was. The reality is that the State Department and the administration at this point is trying to give voters, especially those that are so concerned about the conflict in Gaza, some level of hope. As long as you vote for us, after this 30 days, we'll enforce the law and we will make a change. This is absolutely a deception for the voters and for the American people. We don't need another 30 days. We have had ample evidence from within the United States government, not just the State Department, but a multitude of U.S. agencies with proof that Israel is violating so many of our laws, is systematically withholding humanitarian assistance from going in. As it was mentioned in the report as well, Leahy vetting is being violated, with Army units determined to have committed gross human rights violations. We need to take action, and we should have taken action months ago. This 30 days is only a PR ploy, and that is the only thing it really is, and that's the devastation of all of it, because we have to ask ourselves, what is going to happen in these 30 days? Right after this letter was sent, the Israeli government announced that medical groups were no longer allowed to go into Gaza. They informed the WHO. These are medical groups, including from the United States, that are providing life-saving assistance to people in need, to civilians in need. This was a slap in the face to the administration. If they had actually taken this letter seriously, they wouldn't have taken that step. Additionally, the onslaught of northern Gaza is clear. They're continuing the onslaught, specifically of northern Gaza, a complete blackout, no food, no water, no internet, all this in this 30-day period, supposedly. Unfortunately, we need to stop with the words, with the PR, and we need to take serious action.
And I wanted to ask you, even as the war, this horrific war continues, the United States policy and that of most European countries is still in favor of a two-state solution long-term in the area. But the Israeli Knesset itself overwhelmingly, not just Netanyahu's portion of the government, but overwhelmingly voted earlier this year to reject any possibility of a Palestinian state. I'm wondering your thoughts about the long-term future of the area.
You're absolutely right. And the fact that the Knesset Knesset voted on that shows the fact that we, as the United States, have been enabling and empowering a right extremist government in Israel. And it's time that we stop doing so. There are so many Israeli peace activists. We heard of B'Tselem, but there is a growing movement from within Israel, including family members that actually lost relatives on October 7th, that are demanding an end to the nonstop violence. These are the groups that we need to support. Same on the Palestinian side, Palestinian activists that are calling for coexistence. The U.S. government needs to shift its policy. Again, I'm just going to repeat this over and over again. We continue to empower a right-wing extremist prime minister when we should be doing is supporting civil society on both sides that are actually seeking to promote humanity for both peoples.
Hala, tributes have poured in from across the globe for 19-year-old Shaban Al-Dalou. He was a software engineering student who burned to death after Israel bombed Gaza's Al-Aqsa hospital in central Deir al-Balah last week. He didn't actually die then, but the bombing set fire to the displaced persons camp around the hospital. He had built his little tent area for his family. This is a clip of Zateo News reporter Prem Thacker questioning recently State Department spokesperson Matt Miller about Shaban's death.
The world saw burned alive by the bombing at the Gaza hospital was Shaban Al-Dalou, a 19-year-old engineering student who was still attached to an IV drip recovering from a previous bombing. And his story kind of speaks to how this isn't just about one attack. A 19-year-old having to provide for his family, repeatedly displaced, brought to hunger, bombed twice in a matter of days. This is a year and this isn't out of nowhere. So how many more patients burned alive by U.S.
We don't want to see any. We don't want to see any.
Well, I guess the U.S. has said, again and again, that no civilian loss is acceptable. 10,000 deaths ago, 20,000 deaths ago, and yet it's continued. So how does this answer mean anything without a policy shift?
It is an incredibly difficult environment that Israel operates in. And I'll just make clear, the thing that question leaves out, as often happens, and I understand why, is the burden that Hamas bears. And not just the burden that Hamas bears by hiding behind humans and using humans as civilian shields, but the burden that Hamas bears in not coming back to the table to try to get to a ceasefire. So Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm. Hamas needs to stop hiding behind human shields.
So that's State Department spokesperson Matt Miller being questioned by Zateo News reporter Prem Thacker. Hala, if you can respond to this report. And, since Shaban has died, his brother has died, his mother has died, his sister has died, and people are saying that the family members who were burnt but not yet dead because they can't get out and because the hospital is in such disrepair, they are dying from their burns.
Such immense human suffering, the scale of which we just can't really grapple with. And I have to just thank you, Amy, for humanizing the victims. And we all have to do that as Americans, because ultimately it is our bombs, it is our tax dollars that is creating this catastrophe. As to Matthew Miller, I'm going to be unequivocal. He's lying. And I realize it's quite of a forceful thing for me to say, but as a former diplomat, I can assure that there have been ceasefire deals that Hamas has agreed to. I am not one to advocate for the terrorist organization whatsoever, and I want to be clear about that. But facts are facts. Hamas has repeatedly agreed to ceasefire deals. It is Benjamin Netanyahu who has reneged on those deals. Additionally, you had another guest on this show a while back, Gershon Baskin, who's an Israeli negotiator who has been negotiating on behalf of families of hostages. I have been in close touch with Gershon over the last month. He had and continues to have a deal that, again, is an Israeli deal that Hamas has agreed to. I pushed this to the State Department. I pushed this to the White House at very senior levels. They have it, and it guaranteed the release of all of the hostages, and it guaranteed security for Israel as well. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We have a clip
of
Gershon Baskin.
I've pleaded with Hamas to say yes, not only to me, but to tell the Egyptians and the Qataris that they agree to the deal that I proposed to them, which is a 3-week end of war, full-term ceasefire Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, a release of all the Israeli hostages, and a release of an agreed number and list of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. This is a deal that can be made. It is a million times better than the deal that the United States, Qatar, and Egypt have been trying to negotiate unsuccessfully for the last 3 months, which would just keep the war going and only release 32 hostages in 42 days. That's a bad deal. We need to have a good deal put on the table. I've communicated this to the White House, to the Qataris, to the Egyptians, and of course to the Israeli government. Now the officials need to push this through.
Why is Netanyahu refusing?
Well, it's very clear that Netanyahu doesn't want to end the war, as one of his top negotiators told me on Saturday. The problem with any agreement that we can put forward is that the bottom line is that Hamas won't make an agreement that doesn't end the war, and Netanyahu won't agree to any agreement that ends the war. He wants to keep this going.
That was Gershon Baskin speaking last month. It was before Yahya Sinwar was assassinated. Gershon Baskin, the Israeli researcher and peace activist who's negotiated agreements with Hamas. The significance of what he is just saying, and also, I mean, Tony Blinken was your boss. You would brief him. You translated his words to the Arab world and the messages, and talk about the moment that you decided you cannot do this anymore.
Honestly, there were many moments, Amy, many moments. And after an 18-year career, you don't take the decision to resign lightly. But it was, despite all of my efforts, despite everyone's efforts in terms of us career diplomats, highlighting the inhumanity, the illegality of this policy, the fact that it's such a counterproductive policy that is actually emboldening extremism on all sides. It is only ensuring generational cycle of violence. I was initially told, good, thank you for your feedback. I was actually sending daily reports to the department. That was part of my job as a spokesperson, and I was highlighting what was happening in Gaza from the pan-Arab media. So I thought that my work was helping and feeding into Washington's formulation of what to do next. But it became abundantly clear eventually that the policy was the policy. It was not shifting. I was actually asked in January to stop sending in those reports. Those reports also included the images that were going viral all over the Arab world of children being massacred, oftentimes showing U.S. complicity with fragments of U.S. bomb. Any other circumstance, this would have at least prompted a type of review of our, again, Leahy law, everything else. It didn't. Instead, I was silenced, I was sidelined, and that is something that has been unprecedented for me as an 18-year diplomat. There's always disagreements within the U.S. Foreign Service in terms of policy, but it's always been a spirit of collaboration, a spirit of we want to hear from you, let's talk. This has been different. It has been silence, and let me tell you, it has sent a chilling effect across the entire, I can speak about the Foreign Service. People have become to self-censor themselves, they're worried, and that hurts us as Americans, because when you have your experts, your U.S. government experts silencing themselves because they're worried about retribution, or they're worried about what it will do to their career, we all lose. We lose as American citizens. It doesn't keep us secure. It doesn't keep us safe.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about the impact of all of this and the U.S. position of unequivocal support for Israel has done to the standing of the United States in the Arab and in the world and in the global South.
Yeah, that's a very good question. One, that's actually one of the things that I used to highlight in my daily reports. And I used to show clips and images that were going viral of basically America being determined to be child killers, the country of child killers. After 9/11 and after the war on terror, the U.S. government worked so hard to rehabilitate ties in the Arab world, to improve people-to-people relations. All of that has been devastated. And we are not going to see the repercussions of that. I mean, we are going to feel the repercussions of that for years, decades, generation, because we have lost all credibility. We are seen as a country of double standards. We only care about human rights when it's the human rights of a certain people. We only care about freedom of press when the journalists are not Arab, right? And This is abundantly clear to people across the Arab world and at this point beyond. So unfortunately, we've lost credibility not in terms of just our U.S. policy with regard to the Middle East, but also on Russia-Ukraine. We don't have a leg to stand on. As a spokesperson before the conflict, I did well over 100 interviews, including on Russia-Ukraine, for example. We can no longer talk about that with any credibility because the answer is, why do you care about a Ukrainian child, but you don't care about a child in Gaza? What is the difference? And the racism, the blunt, absolutely blunt racism of this administration has been laid bare, and it's going to be very, very hard to recover from this in the Arab world because we've lost, even as I've discussed publicly before, we've lost quote unquote the liberals across the Arab world, the ones who, despite it all, respected us for our values. But those values, even here at home, with the student protests being violently beaten down, it's all seen through. They're seeing through all of these double standards, and it's hurting us, hurting us as American citizens.
And given the reality of this administration that you resigned from, and that several other career government officials have resigned from, how do you see this election coming in 2 weeks, and the impact of the uncommitted movement, and what you see as an American who's going to have to cast a ballot in this election?
Absolutely. Well, I think the Democratic Party is underestimating the power of this issue. I think they're assuming that people will turn up for Harris because obviously the Trump is a threat to our democracy. But I think they're underestimating the trauma, and I don't use that word lightly, the trauma that this conflict has caused, because so many of us that have been focused on the Middle East have been consuming these incessant images of massacres, absolute massacres of children getting killed, of the suffering now in Lebanon, and it's unacceptable. And I think for a lot of people of conscience, they're not going to be able to bring themselves to vote for Harris, even though they understand that Trump is a threat to our democracy, as he surely is. And I think many are taking serious consideration in a third-party option, whether it's the Green Party or another, because they're tired of the institutionalized corruption that has become our government, and they're tired of politicians who are not working on behalf of the United States, but are rather working on behalf of special interest.
Do you know Philip Gordon, who is the National Security Advisor to Kamala Harris? We're going to have to wrap up in 1 minute, but to ask if you see any distance between Kamala Harris and President Biden.
I don't now, because those are their own words. They've made it abundantly clear that they're going to continue unconditional support to Israel. And they need to. I think we've seen too many words, and at this point, action. And Philip Gordon has made it clear that there's going to be no arms embargo. And for me, that is him agreeing to a continuation of violation of U.S. law. And someone that served my country and swore an oath to the Constitution, that's something I cannot accept.
Hala Rarat, we want to thank you so much for being with us. 18-year career diplomat, the first and only career diplomat to resign the State Department over the Biden administration's Gaza policy. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Puerto Rico. Stay with us. Musician Bad Bunny. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Less than 2 weeks out from the November 5th election, we look now at how voters in Puerto Rico have a chance to deal a blow against the two parties that have dominated politics there for decades. In a packed press conference in Puerto Rico last week, two Puerto Rican members of Congress, Nydia Velázquez and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, both Democrats of New York, formally endorsed the candidates of the Puerto Rican center-left alliance known as the Alianza, which brings together the Puerto Rican Independence Party and the Citizens Victory Party. Its appeal to Puerto Ricans fed up with corruption scandals, austerity policies, and the disastrous privatization of the electrical grid. This is New York Congressmember Nydia Velázquez, the first Puerto Rican woman to serve in Congress, addressing reporters in Spanish.
If political parties with different positions dare to make an alliance to fight for a change in Puerto Rico, the logical step for me is to support them. Today, in front of the sun, I welcome hope and give my endorsement to Juan Del Mal for governor of Puerto Rico, Ana Irma Rivera Lassen for commissioner in Washington, Manuel Natal for mayor of San Juan, and the rest of the candidates of the alliance.
The pro-independence candidate for governor, Juan Del Mal, did not attend the news conference because his wife was in the hospital after suffering a brain aneurysm, is now reportedly in stable yet very delicate condition. This is New York Congressmember Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who also spoke in Spanish as she addressed the news conference in San Juan.
I'm here because I know that Puerto Rico is ready for a change. I don't have to say it to the people of Puerto Rico, our communities that have suffered so much from blackouts, storms, because there are two types of disasters, natural disasters, but also disasters of corruption and deficient leadership. Now it's the moment to choose a government that works for all the people, and not only a few privileged. The people of Puerto Rico deserve a government free of corruption, false promises and scandals. The corruption has cost us so much. It has cost lives.
For more, we go to San Juan, where we will speak with one of the candidates who won these ringing endorsements, Ana Irma Rivera Lassen, minority leader in the Puerto Rico Senate, now the first Black and LGBTQ woman running for what's called resident commissioner. That's Puerto Rico's sole member of Congress, albeit a non-voting member. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. If you can talk about the significance of the Alianza, the party that has pulled together the Puerto Rican Independence Party and the Citizens Victory Party.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. The Alianza, or the Alliance, is the first opportunity for the people of Puerto Rico, a historic opportunity to push aside the corruption of the government right now and have the opportunity to build a new phase for Puerto Rico. And we are trying to give that opportunity to Puerto Rico, but it's very hard because the main parties, Partido No Progresista, Partido Popular, is going around a lot of lies because they say that if Alliance wins, we are going to try to make Puerto Rico independent, and this is a communist opportunity for Puerto Rico, something like that. So we are pushing aside those lies and trying to people to see that this opportunity really is opportunity for a good governance and Puerto Rico to get out of, for example, the Fiscal Control Board and have the opportunity to grow our economy and our human rights to be defense and all the issues that make us a better society. This is the opportunity, this is historic opportunity for Puerto Rico.
And Senator, could you talk about the battle that you have had even to be able to run as an alliance? What laws prevented you from having a one-party run?
Yes, precisely. That's one of the examples. We tried to do this in the same ballot to put the candidate for governor, Juan Del Mal, and in my case, myself for resident commissioner in only one ballot. But we tried. We went to the court, but they did not allow us to do that. So we decided to do it anyway. And we are running, we call it the Alianza, but people have to vote, for example, for Guantanamo in the part of the Puerto Rican Independence Party and have to move to the victory movement, citizen victory movement, and vote for me. That could be a little difficult, but we are doing a lot of campaign teaching people how to vote, and we hope that people can do it because it's only to put the name, the cross beside the name, and the cross beside the other name, and all the other ballots, for example, for San Juan El Carto, they only have to put an X under the sign of Movimiento de Victoria Ciudadana, citizen movement, victory movement, because those are all for the alliance. So we are keeping people in this campaign of how to vote, and I think that's going to be our main issues in these 2 weeks: explaining people, teaching people how to vote for the alliance. They try to include in, they took out, for example, 2 of our candidates for the leaders, for the Senate and for the Chamber of Representatives in Puerto Rico. And those are going to be in writing candidates. So they also in the campaign teaching people how to vote for them. In my case, they try to get out of me also from the ballot. But I went to the federal court because the resident commission is a federal position, and I won, and they had to put me in the ballot. So in my case, I'm in the ballot of the resident commissioner position, and the people can vote for me. Just put an X beside my name.
And I wanted to ask you about the situation, continuing problems with the electrical grid in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, of course, and the Financial Control Board managed to privatize the electricity, and Luma Energy came in. But things have, not only has the price of electricity increased, but blackouts have increased as well across the island. Could you talk about the efforts of the government to get rid of Luma, but the control board won't let them?
Well, the government, no efforts to get rid of Luma. Now they're talking about that, but really the only efforts to get rid of Luma is from our alliance for the Puerto Rican Independence Party and for the movement. We are the only one talking about that before the elections. Now they're talking about get rid of Luma. Luma is the worst contract that you ever believe a country can make with a private contract. We have to talk about that, to explain to people of Puerto Rico that we have to control again the electrical power authority and make it functions. Because the only way to do that is get out of Luma and start to travel or start to go through the sun or other sources of electricity that you are supposed to do. In Puerto Rico, we are supposed to do that, and they are not doing that neither. So we are talking about get again the control of the electrical grid, and also to take the phases to to sun and other sources for electricity. So we are doing that right now.
Ana Irma Rivera Lassen, we want to thank you for being with us, Minority Leader in the Puerto Rico Senate and the first Black and LGBTQ woman running for resident commissioner, which is the equivalent of a Congress member, albeit non-voting. We'll be speaking to her in Spanish after the broadcast and posting it on our Spanish website. Coming up is New York Mayor Eric Adams, resists calls to resign after being indicted on federal corruption charges, we'll speak with a New York State lawmaker who's just announced he's running for mayor next year. Stay with us. There is a Country in the World by the Puerto Rican musician Estrella Artal, released on Paradigm Records. That's the label co-founder Barbara Jane's label. She died this week at the age of 97. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We end today's show here in New York, where the city's mayor, Eric Adams, continuing to resist calls to resign after being indicted on federal corruption charges. In recent weeks, at least 7 senior city officials have also resigned, leaving the city government in a state of crisis. This comes a year before New Yorkers will vote to pick the next city's mayor. Adams has vowed to run for re-election, but opponents, including fellow Democrats, are lining up to run against him. We're joined now by New York Assembly member Zohran Mamdani, who is just announcing he's joining the race. He is a Ugandan-born Democratic socialist who was elected to the New York State Assembly 4 years ago. In fact, very interesting because in the last year also, you have an interesting record, actually arrest record. You've been arrested twice, right?
Yes.
First time you were arrested in front of Senator Charles Schumer's house.
Yes.
Protesting.
I was protesting the response, the Israeli military assault on Gaza. This was about a week after October 7th, and we were already seeing war crimes multiplying by the day. And I was protesting alongside Jewish New Yorkers to say, do not let their pain be used as justification for more.
The
second time was with New Yorkers and tenant activists outside the Rent Guidelines Board after Mayor Adams' board once again raised rents on more than 2.5 million rent-stabilized tenants across New York City.
Well, Mayor Adams has made history. He's the first sitting New York City mayor to be indicted on federal corruption charge after federal corruption charge. Talk about why you're running.
You know, I'm running partially because of the fact that we have a mayor under federal charges, for charges that he has said he will fight with every ounce of strength and spirit in his body, which begs the question, where does that leave working-class New Yorkers? And I'm also running because of the fact that he's been failing those very New Yorkers far before these charges. He is somebody who has run a city that is failing to meet the legal standard of what basic services look like when you're delivering them to the very people that rely on that city to survive.
And given the fact that there is such a large number of people who have already indicated they're going to run or are likely to run, including the former controller Scott Stringer, the present controller Brad Lander, Jessica Ramos, and even Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, why do you feel that you have a clear shot to be able to win?
You know, I think that a number of members of the political class think that the most pressing issue that is facing New Yorkers right now is the corruption that has engulfed City Hall, or an issue of competence with this mayor. And I think while those are important, the true crisis that most New Yorkers think about on a day-to-day basis is cost of living. And this is a campaign where we are not only going to focus on that crisis relentlessly, but we are beginning it by putting forward 3 bold proposals that will immediately take action on that very issue. We are going to free
freeze the rent for every single rent-stabilized tenant for every single year of the mayoralty. We are going to make buses free and fast across this entire city, and we are going to enact universal childcare at no cost for all New Yorkers for children from the ages of 6 weeks to 5 years. These are the policies that will set us apart, and these are the policies that resonate with New Yorkers' concerns.
And how do you expect to be dealing with the housing crisis in general? Because it's not just the rent-stabilized units, but it's all the housing in New York that is so expensive for the average person.
You know, I think there are a number of tools that the mayor has to confront the housing crisis. To the first point, we have a city of 8.3 million people. Close to 2.5 of them live in rent-stabilized units, which are supposed to be the bedrocks of economic stability. The mayor has raised the rent by rates that we haven't seen since a Republican ran City Hall. And to your point, for New Yorkers who do not live in those units, what they've found as well is that the city is not picking up its tools. The city is not ending brokers' fees. The city is trying to veto an expansion of voucher programs as opposed to leaning into that expansion. And furthermore, there are opportunities for the city to be building 100% affordable housing on 100% publicly owned land. These are some of the clear opportunities we have that I will take as the next mayor of New York City.
And what does it mean to be running as a Democratic Socialist?
You know, I think it means that I am putting myself forward not simply as an individual, but rather as someone who belongs to a larger tradition. A tradition that says these issues right now are ones that have to be understood at a systemic level. And if we want to provide New Yorkers with the dignity that is required, we need to start making sure that everything they need to live that kind of a life is guaranteed to them, is not something that they can instead be priced out of, as we're seeing today with rent, with childcare, with public transit.
And if you could talk some more about your stance on the war in Gaza, which clearly, or in the Palestinian territories, which clearly is not normally a plank of a candidate for mayor in New York City, but certainly will affect how people vote.
You know, I think there's tremendous anger and alienation across New York City today, whether it's these corruption crises or the cost of living or the fact that our tax dollars are continuing to fund a genocide across Palestine. And what voters are looking for is someone who can speak clearly to that crisis of confidence and of faith in the power of government to be a positive force in people's lives, and to offer them a vision that is worth believing in. And that is what I am going to do in this campaign, is to put forward an economic agenda that puts working class New Yorkers first, all while recognizing the world as it actually is, which is one where there is a hierarchy of human life that the United States government is following that states that it is fine for Palestinians and Lebanese and Syrians and Yemenis to be killed, because that is simply the worth that they have in the eyes of our federal government.
So you're an activist, you get arrested, you go on hunger strike with the taxi drivers in 21, on hunger strike around Gaza in Washington, D.C., a 5-day hunger strike. You get arrested, but you're also in the legislature currently, New York, and you introduced not on our dime, ending New York funding of Israeli Settler Violence Act. Where has that gone, and what specifically does that say New York State should do?
So what that legislation says is that it should be illegal for New York State nonprofits to fund Israeli war crimes. And if you ask any New Yorker, it is quite common sense to say that charities should not be funding the violation of international human rights. What we found in New York City and across this country is when you dare to apply universal standards to Israel, you are left as a caricature as opposed to someone standing up for the broad application of universal rights. That is a piece of legislation that I introduced in May of 2023. It is one that has started to increase the number of co-sponsors we've seen in both chambers, and also recently received the support from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
And also, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but you've promised also to eliminate all bus fares on city buses if you're elected. How would you pay for that?
So that is something that I would use current city revenue towards, as well as use the bully pulpit, the second largest in America, to continue to advocate for what I've been calling for since I got to Albany, which is raising taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers and the wealthiest corporations that do business in New York. What we've seen in the free bus pilot that we won in Albany just 2 years ago is that when you make buses free, ridership increases by 30%, assaults on bus operators drop by nearly 40%, and you get people out of cars and onto public transit. It's time we bring that reality to every New Yorker across New York City.
Zoran Mandani, Democratic Socialist, New York State Assembly member, is today launching his campaign for New York City mayor. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for our video news production and digital fellowship programs. You can learn more and apply at democracynow.org. And we'll be doing an election night 4-hour special. Check it out on our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
It's that time again. CIUT's fall fundraiser is officially underway, and the on-air campaign is ready to launch November 18th to 24th. We would love for you to support the sound of your city by donating today. Visit CIUT.FM online to make your tax-deductible donation and show that you value independent programming presented here each and every day. That's www.ciut.fm. We look forward to hearing from you.
From the roots up, CIUT 89.5 FM, Toronto.
There are all of those things you weren't supposed to do. Yes, and my, they were talking to you. There were all of those words that you shouldn't have said. Like a dagger thrown, carry away to live. Living on a high note, living on a high note, living on a high note. Listen now that it's known, and the way it's been shown. Yes, and my, you have grown. Gather all of the rain and every ounce of pain. Wash the dirt and dust down the drain. It's living on a high note, living on a high note, living on a high note. It's living on a high note, living on a high note, living on a high note. And if you gotta sing low, sometimes the way to go. Joe, he looked over at Dave. He was thinking he had it made. Dave looked over at Paul. He was thinking he had it all. Paul looked over at Steve. Who was steadily moving toward what he needed. He was living on a high note, living on a high note. He was living on a high note. He was living on a high note.
Wow.
He was living on a living on a high note, living on a high note. He was living on a
The good water. Let me turn that off actually. So it is October 24th, 2024. Common Era, ERA / epoch, EPOCH. Time period, not to be confused with ERROR. Mistake. Incorrect. Era, ERA, 2024. Common Era. The Ethiopian calendar, which the Church of England and the Anglican Church of Canada used to use before 1991, Common Era, is in the year 2017 Ethiopian calendar. Not everybody that goes to the Church of England uses the Ethiopian calendar. Some people probably experience memory lapse or time loss due to adapting to the calendar that came out of the United States that was pushed on the world by the document of discovery, Dutch Frenchman League pushing the document of discovery. So some people in the 70s, when I was a toddler, were saying William Shakespeare was alive. I battled through brainwashing in my life. People brainwashed me to make me think I was immortal or semi-immortal, while some older females that knew me since I was born and older males that knew me since I was born were always trying to break me out of that brainwashing all the way into the 90s Common Era. One of the ones, Diane, I now seem to see like she was trying to get me to remember that I think my grandfather used to carry her on his shoulders and we used to be on this island, walking on this island when I was younger, before our language was forced changed into French and English by document of discovery, people pushing black versus white, as opposed to what we talked about in 1984, having the English language media use a brown color wheel and people being identified with the color of their skin, from bone, ivory, sugar, from cocoa color to ebony coal complexion, and properly describe people's complexion if doing a crime, instead of saying black or white or just assuming black. The world is stuck in bad English. The world media uses bad English. I talked to one of my friends recently, Kerry, which invited me to go to Thailand. He's a little bit older than me. It seems he might be one of the 2 IC vets, which I have been a memory guard for since 1984, Common Era, at least, which is over 40 years ago. That's 40 full, complete circles around Helios, Corona, the sun up in the sky that you see providing heat to this planet daily. If the sun wasn't there providing heat to this planet would not have life on it. People talking about they want to block out the sun to control global warming are uneducated in poly, P-O-L-Y, /P-A-N, pan, meaning many sciences. The sound P-A-N in English can mean more than 5, or a specific being, person's name, entity in mythology, i.e. Lord Pan is a sexual being of the species called fauna, fawn, which is a bisexual species, just like human is bisexual. It takes a male and a female to make a next generation of humanity once they are past puberty or going into adulthood. which is the same for the species known as fawn or sitar. Lord Pan, not to be confused with Baphomet, which is associated with Satan, is totally different. Lord Pan would more be associated with the god of nature, and Baphomet would be Satan. And if they're adversaries, it is what there is. Too many people are worshipping Moloch, Baphomet. They look similar. Baphomet has a goat head. Pan has sheep horns with a humanist face with sheep legs. There's a difference. So back to the world problem that stopped our astronomy over the last 40 years. The Nazis and the Zionists with their crazy theories like flat earth, etc., 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 and Aryanism. Aryan is not related to Europe at all. That term is from South Asia, Bharatian, Hindu, which means of high birth. It's not from the Deutsch language. So in Autochthonos Germans claiming they are Aryan are not Autochthonos to Europe. Sir Mandy Andamini, he was just talking last year on Democracy Now! Not on our dime. I sat on the other side of this structure last year on October 15th. At that time, I was not listening to Democracy Now! At all. I was not watching news, alternative news daily. I was watching the news, regular news sometimes on TV. And at that time, when October 7th happened, I said, this is not good. When October 15th hit, I sat there watching out the window in the morning, hearing hunters out in the distance, wondering if people are going to kill me here at this house because of what I know and what I say. I'm still here. But on that October 17th in 2023, I said the Israelis, IDF, are going to lose all credibility within a year if they keep this up. Murdering the Palestinians, a word that means stone palace. Palestinians, which happen to be Semitic, Israelite, Abrahamic descent Arabs and North Africans that live in the Levant. So a conversation my uncle was having back in the 70s, saying that a fake uncle that stole our family and forced us to speak French and English along with the immortal sex cult, he was saying he works for the Nazis. So I've always had in my mind, just like for my grandfather, white supremacists and black supremacists do not help the world. They are working for the same hand. They are the same body, destabilizing all cultures. The most popular person that said power to the people associated with Black Panther was Bobby Seals. He was maybe older than documented. If I shaved my beard right now and dye my hair, I could pass as a 20-year-old. A lot of American Indians were kidnapped from their families and forced into school, depending on their height. They could have been in schools, told they were younger, at an age they were much older. It is what it is. The 60 scoop is way worse than people think. The whole world is a residential school, especially with this language, English, as a universal language used on Earth. It used to be Greek across the Atlantic in certain parts, and Norse in certain parts, and Bantu in certain parts. And Mayan was known in the Caribbean to what is called the Arawakan-Tuano. Like my grandfather would state, what is called the Arawakan-Tuano would be considered the Mayan Navy. There's a Mayan temple on Jamaica and Cuba. There's a Mayan similar temple off the ocean underwater. But that our history is being erased. by document of discovery. Frenchmen and Dutchmen that are working in a league to erase history and make it white or black. Whichever way wins, wins, and that's the way they'll go with. We, real people, cultural people, that say power to the people, black power, white power. White power does not mean white supremacy, just like black power does not mean black supremacy. White power, black power, brown power, yellow power, all those power they were talking about when the Black Panthers talked about, Bobby Seals and Fred Hampton, they were talking about know your rights. Learn to defend yourself. Know how to take care of yourself in the environment. You should be able to, as a human, live on the planet, know your rights, and be able to defend yourself. It does not mean you have the right to attack anyone. You don't have the right to say, I'm going to go to someone else's house, i.e., in the world stage, cross someone's border and attack them. You don't have that right. No one does. No culture, no religion, no spiritual path has that right. And that is straight from Yahweh. What the Israelis are doing, why don't they identify as Israelite? Israelite is what it is in the Bible. Yah, Israel, the Israelites, the descendants of Israel, named Israel. I'm not debating whether it was who or who, but someone was named Israel. And they're all related. So if the Israelis are really Israelite, currently right now, they are Holocausting Israelites just because they don't look European. And that is the actual fact. Some people say the Holocaust didn't happen in Germany. They say it did, with 6 million Jews being murdered. I know from history, Roma were also being executed by the Nazis. Roma called the gypsy, a term that Pink Panther Nikki told me gypsy meant I was gypped off, stolen. So it's a derogatory term. The proper term is Roma. Roman people, the real Roma. Real Roma is the Balkans, Romania, and that area. Fake Rome is the city called Rome in Italy. The word Katholiki, which Jacob ben Yosef would have spoken, they call him Jesus in English, but some would say that's incorrect because they're praising Zeus. He would have said Katholiki, which means universal, if I translate that sound pattern directly from Greek. So Roma means wandering in modern human English, or moving, the movable. The Roma, Romanese, Rome, Balkans, Greece, Slovenia, Slovakia, Montenegros. That is ancient Rome, where Athens was. Italy, that's ancient Etruskia. But beyond the point of before my memory came back in 2008, when I saw on Facebook Syncretic Society talking about in Eastern Europe suspect the Roman Catholic Church added 300 to 500 years to the Anno Domini calendar to have us in this present year number, 2024 Common Era. So back to the Ethiopian calendar, be 2017. Some people were saying that before I was born, or around the time I was born, it jumped 100 years in one day. So if it didn't jump, to some people, like my mom's generation, like she was trying to say in the early 80s, he's being scammed by the fake uncle, and everybody else is being scammed along with him. Every culture on the planet is being scammed by the fake uncles, people pushing black versus white, the influencers, the sexual influencers and the influencers influencing the world to be black or white are corrupting the world. So if that jump didn't happen my mom was talking about in the early 80s, it'd be 1917 right now, this year, to the people that lived the one generation and two generations before me. And if that was really William Shakespeare in 1974, that I recall as a toddler being knee-high, translating the Bible from Greek into Old English and Modern English, is it possible he went undercover in the 70s because of the erosion of history because of the United States and forced English and French in the Americas? I have to dip my head into a bowl again. I'm losing my strength to speak. I got a severe neurological disorder. If I didn't have this medication that is illegal because of the United States, I wouldn't be able to speak or even walk. It is not cocaine in the water, nor is it opium. It is the real peace pipe. Cannabis. Like my grandfather would say, you're smoking tobacco, you're smoking the Virginian lobbyist bush. You're not smoking the American indigenous peace pipe. I had said I was trying to talk in a bowl of water so you could see I'm releasing all the air out of my lungs and trying to release all of my air out of my lungs. Yeah, so that's a bundle of the real peace pipe in water. I got bi lungs. Tried to explain this to people, goes through my mouth, tried to explain this to people. Some people might have bi lungs. Bi meaning two. Air, considered dry. Water, considered wet. Two bi lungs. If you could only breathe air, mono lungs. And people were making fun of the ghost speaking out my mouth at a time period when I didn't even know I could swim well. I didn't know I could swim like a barracuda, shark, whale, dolphin. At the time I was saying bi lungs, mono lungs out of my mouth in 1990 to 1992. I did not know I could swim that well. Or breathe water to the degree I am right now. So, the fact that I seen an MRI of a Palestinian that could retract his penis, and that could only be done if you're not circumcised, it would mean that the IDF and the Zionists are murdering the true Israelites, the people that came before the Israelites. They are murdering them. Because if the covenant of the circumcision started with Israel, it means people that are not circumcised have an older covenant with Yahweh. And no one gave Israel the right to murder people worldwide of a different covenant. Like the guy from Forbidden Knowledge would say, I don't agree with exactly everything he says because he considers the Sumerian day charts in years. I'm pretty sure it's in days. Mr. Carson would say they are worshiping Satan if they go murder people. The story of Abraham, when he said to sacrifice his son, and they interpret that sacrifice as murder him on the mountain, and he didn't do it. That is the devil saying go murder people. The God that told him don't kill their son, name him this, and start people in the future is the good God. In the Bible, you could see the Israelites are being deceived by Satan and by Satan while being pushed the right way, pointed to the right way by Yahweh. Right now, the IDF are murdering a lot of Israelites that are Arab descent and African descent, genetically Semite descent. The Zionists made up a term, anti-Semite, which does not reflect that the term Semite, Semitic, means descendant from Shem, one of Noah's sons, that survived the flood, detailed in many cultures in the Arabia. So further on, going backwards through this document, Democracy Now! Mayor Adams indicted. There was Jews protesting in New York City over combat field crimes done by the IDF 1 week after October 7th, 2023, Common Era. I did not know that at all, but I sat across on this on the other side of this structure, watching out the window, saying it's going to fall apart for that country called Israel, because they are murdering the true Israelites, and most of the world doesn't even know that yet. A lot of the world doesn't realize that Hasidic Orthodox Jews were beaten with batons and clubs by Israeli police. And I saw it in video. And that just happened a few months ago. How many times has that happened? The real descendants of Israel have been speaking out against the Zionists since the start. Even Einstein had said out and spoke out against the Zionists from the start. The Zionists and the Nazis are just like each other. Encoded, encrypted in history and time for everybody to know. Without them doing it, it happens naturally like that. Nazi, National, Alamondi, Socialist Party. Z and S came from the same letter in the runic language. Z, z, z. National, Alamondi, Socialist Party. I, party, means group of people. French. French, party. It's not German. Alamondi. It's not German or Deutsch again. French. Alamondi is a French word for Deutsch. German. Nationalized. Alamondi. Socialist. Party. It's a Frenchman league. In the matrix. Holding the keys. To the world. Blaming other people for the problems of the world. Break it down with the Zionist word. Socialist. Party. Oligarch. Nationalized. It is what it is. Time breaks it back and brings it back right back into the future. The Nazis are Dutch descent Frenchmen executing the document of discovery for the Latin Rite Roman Catholic Church, while the Zionists are the ones claiming to be Jewish, doing the same thing. The Nazis are claiming to be Christian, the Zionists are claiming to be Jewish. Both of them are working against Israel's nation, murdering Semites worldwide in Africa and the Levant, which is the most western part of the Arabia and what was called the Middle East. Those agents working with the congressmen in the United States, the AIPAC agents as they call it, you gotta have your 2 Israeli congressmen. Is the congressmen in the United States have to have 2 Israeli people, lobbyists? No. Those congressmen in the United States were supposed to have representation from the local indigenous tribes, not Israelis. That's half the world away. In the Arabia, this is America. That's foreign interference. That's illegal. That is documented international combat crimes. That the Israeli Zionists, Nazis have been doing well before I was born. Documented on TV the last 50 years. We watching it all. I told Obi-Wan back in the 90s, Netanyahu is the Antichrist. That was the first time I had seen him on TV. I looked in his eyes and said, This guy is the Antichrist, and I see it more. It's odd his name works like that, encoded throughout history, back and forth. Netanyahu, Satan, 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 Yahoo. Yahoo is a term from the Wild Wild West. It means a person that comes and kicks you off your land and throws you everything, burns everything you have, so you can't even prove it's your land. Satan and his Yahoos. Netanyahu. It is what it is. USA lost all credibility last year, October 15th, 2023, by supporting the Zionists. Bet Selah, an Israeli human rights group, has said the IDF, the Israeli IDF, are committing genocide against the Palestinians. They didn't go far enough to say there are a lot of Palestinians that are Semitic Israelite descent that happened to convert to Christianity. Some converted to Islam. Some even converted to Baha'ist faith, or whatever it's called. I read the book about Babula. I would not convert to it. I'm American indigenous. I read about cultures. I know about cultures. In English properly, like my uncles and older generation would say, people are speaking proper English. If a violinist and a pianist is enthusiastic about the instrument they're playing, a racist is enthusiastic about race. Which means I'm enthusiastic about humanity. But news media twists it. Instead of saying you're discriminating against my race, they say the person's racist. Not realizing, yeah, the person's enthusiastic about their race, but they're also trying to highlight a point that's going wrong about someone else's doing it. Alatar. That was the first name they mentioned in this thing. I find it odd because when I had my accident and almost died in 2005, Michelle Alatar accosted me. Accosted means they met you, they came up to you and talked to you out of nowhere. In the Rouge Park, wearing a pink baby fat ski suit, one-piece baby fat ski suit, trying to get me to stop walking in 2005 or 2006. It even got so far that I was addicted to walking and standing, not to cannabis, addicted to walking. It got so bad that I parked at Meadowville, walked. I don't know how I don't calculate the time when I walk, but a troop of people ran by me in the snow and ice. And as soon as they saw it, I said, felt strange. I said, that seems strange. They seem like they're not people that would be out here usually. I turned around, and as soon as I turned around, they ran back the other way. I realized later, those must have been some of the people that know who I am. They're running in the forest saying, yo, this is that autistic freaking super genius that doesn't even realize he's walking himself to death because he was brainwashed by Timothy Tarku, possibly Yakuba Gowan, freaking child molester, sexual predator that works for the immortal sex cult, just like Epstein and Obama and Cosby and Weinstein and a whole slew of other people. I probably got 200 names I could list off, like that little girl from Game of Thrones. Have a great day. It's Shinogi, Sean, John, the real. Not no puffy combs at all. Not like him. I'm not like that guy. Don't like him. Never like Jay-Z. He may rhyme well, but I don't like what he got to say.